to go through the complete history of abstract art, which would be here till the middle of next week. But I think two things are very important to think about whenever you're thinking about painting in general, but specifically in abstraction. The early development of abstraction was tied to the spiritual and the tradition of the spiritual. Of course, the most famous book is Kandinsky's On the Spiritual in Art, published in 1913. But it began before that as an anarchic gesture. The first abstract painting, you could say, was a black monochrome, not the black monochrome of Malevich, but a black monochrome that was exhibited in 1882 in the Salon of Incoherence, very interesting name for a salon, incoherent, in Paris. And in fact, as we understand, the monochrome and the beginning of abstract painting begins in the late 19th century, not as is conventionally thought in the 20th century. Most famously, this spiritual tradition is associated with Hilma af Klint, the great female mystic painter from the late 19th century, and whose work has become internationally well known in recent years. So the spiritual tradition is one tradition, and that's often linked to either a philosophical tradition or also to a musical tradition. Kandinsky frequently drew an analogy between music and painting. It's called synesthesia. It's a principle developed in the late 19th century. That's one half. The other tradition is what we will call the materialist tradition. And materialism, of course, is exemplified probably in abstraction from the 1920s, when they move away from this sort of early beginnings within the spiritual and abstract art into areas of industry. This is most known in Germany through the Bauhaus and through groups like the Style, which was founded in 1917 and ran through to the early 20s. The links between early Bauhaus and the Style is very interesting in that Theo van Doesburg, who had founded the Style's journal in 1917, was a friend of Walter Gropius, who is, of course, the founder of the Bauhaus in 1919. And this early period was whereas the early Bauhaus in Weimar, where it was, and from 1919 to 25, had a sort of spiritual inflection. After 1922, it took itself much more into an industrial inflection and a much more moving away from arts and crafts, which it began as an art school, into an area that is quite specifically supporting industry, design. And this begins a tradition of abstraction in Germany that runs right through the 20s, which is then, as it were, shut down when the Nazis come to power in the early 30s. And of course, many of the artists' works were shown in the Entartete Kunst exhibition, the degenerate art exhibition by the National Socialists that began in Munich and then toured the late 30s to 1940. The other connection to Germany is that in America, when abstract art began, like a lot of early abstract art, it came out of Cubism or innovations in relation to Cubism. In America, Marston Hartley, people like this. But by the 1930s, America developed its own traditions of abstraction in the Abstract Artists Association, where people like Lee Krasner, who later married Jackson Pollock, and people emerged. So American abstraction emerges largely in the 30s with the support of a man called Alfred Barr, who invented a museum called MoMA, which opened in 1929. So that strand of American abstraction comes largely from the influences of Cubism in America after the Armory show and onwards. But more importantly, a German artist who went to live in America was very influential, and that was Hans Hofmann. Hans Hofmann, who was, I believe, born in Nuremberg, but studied in the Kunstakademie in Munich.
Weissenburg.
Sorry?
Weissenburg.
Oh, Weissenburg, that's it. But he studied in the Kunstakademie in Munich, and of course, as he was born in 1888, he grew up against the background of Blau-Weiss, he's a very coloristic abstract painter when he emerges in New York, and he sets up a school in New York on West 57th Street in the 1930s, around 1936. He'd been invited in 1930 by Berkeley to teach, so he's very influential on the emergence of West Coast distraction, but more importantly, many of his students and followers from the 30s were people like Barnett Newman and the post-war American abstract tradition. Now, why is this relevant? Because American abstraction has two sides to it. It has a more conceptual side and the more spontaneous abstract expressionist side. You see this in the juxtaposition of Newman, say, with Pollock, and so on. And that sort of condition also shaped European art in the post-war period within the context of the École de Paris, the French school of tradition of abstraction. There had been movements through the 30s called Art concret from 1930 to 33, and abstraction creation, Cercle et Carré. All of these were coming out of traditionally Cubist associations. But in the post-war period, you get this dichotomy, which is very important, between what is called hot art and cold art. The cold art was considered the geometric abstraction, an art that took a rather geometric line, and that line was exemplified by a salon called the Salon of New Realities, the Salon de Réalité Nouvelle, which was exhibited in Paris. Artists from all over Europe exhibited it between 1946 and 59. As many as I said, it was in the Grand Palais, and it had as many as 200 or so exhibit artists in. So this dichotomy then was separate from the informel tradition, which is like abstract expressionism, but it's more informal tradition and informal painting. And the lead in this was a man called Michel Tapie. And Michel Tapie published a very important article in 1951 called An Art Autre, an art of otherness, an art of formlessness. One of the central characteristics of geometric art is its focus on form. One of the characteristics of informal painting and abstract expressionism is not its focus on form, but its focus on gesture and expression. So those are two avenues of art, and they lived in totally separate worlds in post-war in Paris, whereas in America there wasn't the same conflict between abstract expressionism and what was called hard edge painting, people like Frank Stella and so on and so forth. So these are like channels of thought. And again, you have a traditional element of the spiritual when you talk about Rothko, people talk about his painting in regard to the sublime and the spiritual. But these dichotomies run through the whole history, the spiritual and the material. In the 20s, the focus is on the material. Obviously, we're talking about the Russian Revolution, the challenges of the 20s, and of course Marxism didn't believe in God, so didn't believe in the spiritual, and so that avenue. Now, why is it all relevant? Well, because we're here today looking at a period where the question of figuration versus abstraction, or informel versus geometric art, is not an issue anymore. This changes in the context, it seems to me, with postmodernism, when painting becomes a much more heterogeneous practice. I mean, we can sing several songs at the same time. We can have Bob Marley today and Mozart tomorrow. We live in a much more heterogeneous world, much more pluralistic form of practice. And these artists, all of them in their different ways, are obviously in the expressive tradition, very much in the expressive tradition, but they also include elements of gesture. They make references back to early abstract art in the terms of collage. I mean, a lot of this is what I would call collage painting, which doesn't necessarily mean it's made up of collage elements, but it means the principle of layering is very relevant. And this aesthetic today is frequently referred to as a palimpsest aesthetic, the layering of things on top of each other. It draws analogy to memory, and I think one of the artists here is particularly interested in memory, is it? Juan Logan, you're very concerned with memory. Maybe you should say about how you see your art in relation to memory as an abstract practice. All of the palimpsest, the layering, the theory of the trace, which is one of the central
Oh,
elements.
absolutely. Sure. In that regard, yes, absolutely. But I think also because of my involvement in abstraction for an extended period of time now, I guess for the last 40 years or so, that layering did take place. I mean, even looking at paintings I did 40 years ago, some of them had, 80 to 100 layers of paint on them. And it was built up and built up. The paintings actually gained weight. There was so much paint on them. And it was a whole process, though, of making that I thoroughly enjoyed. And the realization that I was never in a hurry to make work, it just took as long as it would take. I mean, that's just what it was all about. Mm-hmm. And certainly in looking at all the people that I enjoyed along that pathway, Man Ray being one of them, of course, but also Ellsworth Kelly, Jasper Johns, Richard Hamilton, Marcel Duchamp. I mean, any number of artists that I responded to along those lines because of the layering process that they explored.
Well, interesting you brought up Ellsworth Kelly, because Ellsworth Kelly is a classic example of an American who lived in France after on the GI Bill and forms a bridge between American abstraction and European abstraction. I think Sam Francis, and they both represent these two parallel lines I talked about, the expressive line you associate with Sam Francis, of course, and the more geometric, asymmetrical surfaces you associate with Ellsworth Kelly. So how does memory function in your art today then? The notion of...
Well, I think what has happened over the years is that my work has become not so much has become social, it's always been social in nature. I've always felt that abstraction is a wonderful way to respond to things that were taking place around me. And I mean, to that extent, I was looking at some quotes yesterday of people that have responded to this. I was thinking about Nina Simone, and she said, an artist's duty, as far as I'm concerned, is to reflect the times. And I think that we, as artists, have done that effectively over the years. And it doesn't really matter if we're talking about visual arts, we're talking about music, literature. We've always done that. And I was thinking also, Crystal Williams, who was the president of Rhode Island School of Design, was commenting on Howard Thurman, a theologian from back in the 40s. And he said, the intense effort to oppress a group acts as a measurement of that group's latent power. We, as artists, possess that power. We always have, which is why the governments in many respects tries their best to shut us down in one way or another. And even Toni Morrison said, dictators and people in office and people who want to control and deceive know exactly who will disturb their plans. And those people are artists. They're the ones that tell the truth. So I think we've used our work in various ways to talk about just that, to tell the truth about our governments, about what's happening around us socially. And that's always been a part of it. It always has been.
Socially engaged. You take a socially engaged viewpoint, which is something that comes out of abstraction in the 20s in constructivism and in Russian art particularly. Yeah, okay.
I mean, I think it's impossible not to be involved with what is happening around us today, globally. You know, how do we sit back and look at that and never say anything about it?
I mentioned Nina Simone in passing.
Right.
Wanted to bring up this issue.
Right. Central
to abstraction, and perhaps ask Howard the same. I'm asking the two artists here because you have limited time probably on the Zoom. So
sure.
There is a sense in which Nina Simone, of course, is one associates with syncopation, with jazz, with the convention, and music has always been very central to painting. So I'd like to ask Howard specifically about his work in relation to notion of the trace and the palimpsest. The palimpsest, of course, you all know what a palimpsest is, do you? You all know what it is. It's an old in the Middle Ages, before we had paper, they used to do all the illuminations are on vellum, and because vellum is very expensive, if they were using like merchants used vellum for contracts and things, they could scrape them off. You could erase the writing and recycle it. And the thing is, when we X-ray vellum from this period, we see the traces hidden. That's why the notion of the palimpsest is very like human memory. Memory is layered. We don't remember in a straight line. Something that happened 5 years ago is more vivid than what you had for breakfast yesterday. So, we don't remember in a linear way. So the palimpsest is very important. Anyway, Howard, it's more important that you speak about your work because you talk about adding and subtracting as part of your abstract art process. Anyway, Howard, it's more important that you speak about your work because you talk about adding and subtracting as part of your abstract art process. And of course, that is also an idea of the palimpsest, the scraping away, the putting on, the taking off. Maybe you'd like to say something about that.
It's sort of innate within the work. I don't really, you know, so I feel like some of these historic labels they're important as sort of reference material, but I personally am pushing hard to sort of move past it. My work, like I'd alluded to before, isn't necessarily quote unquote abstract. That while there's abstraction in it, that there's also figurative elements in it, and so I think maybe I'm extra sensitive to it because there was an abstract art history book that came out a few years ago that I was on the cover of, and I'm always sort of chafing against the label of that, even though I know that I'm incorporating a lot of that in a historic context. But to answer your question, which sounds like it's about process,
Yeah,
um,
process-based.
I'm sorry,
It's a
what?
process-based question in the process.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that sort of, you've heard it before out of historical abstract expressionist stuff where there's a lot of call and response, but that's not exclusive to the abstract expressionists. And I am editing a lot and scraping some things away, painting things over, just trying to get to a place where I feel really good about the work. But for I can only speak for myself here, obviously, is you know, I look at the work. Um, there's a lot of formal rigor that goes into the work that's comes out of teaching undergraduate drawing when I was a TA in graduate school, where perspective, 1 point perspective, 2 point perspective, composition, shape, color theory, value, all those things are still very, very important to me. And in the scope of that comes scraping things away sometimes, or painting things over and adding things on.
Can I ask you how when you look at quoting Mallarmé, the blank sheet of paper, as it were, the blank canvas, do you see it as a field of interaction, or do you have any idea where you're going, or do you do studies or compositional?
Yeah, well, I've been quoted before. I guess I'll just use it again. I mean, the catchy thing to say is the plan is to have as little plan as possible,
Mhm.
but the truth of the matter is that you get to a certain point, and again, I won't speak for any of the other artists that are sitting on the panel, but it seems like everyone's been at it for a very long time, and you get to a point where you have certain vocabulary words within your language or certain tools within your tool belt, and you're gonna use those words or those tools over and over again as you make work. The trick is to try and shuffle the deck, so to speak, and not use them in the same way every time. So um, again, I hope I didn't get off on a tangent there, but
No, no, no,
I kind of try not to have anything in mind when I start something brand new. But there's a lot of times where something bubbles up from the subconscious and you want to work with certain colors, or you want to start with certain colors, um, or there's some other idea based on something you saw or read within your environment, and there's an impulse there. But I try and be as open as possible from the very beginning to let things sort of occur or happen. Because I know that within my language, there's going to be, it's going to look a certain way. There's a reason why it's called a body of work, and one thing looks a little bit like something else, which looks a little bit like something else, and it doesn't look like some multiple personality person created everything in the studio. Does that make sense?
yes, it does. But when you say the term body of work can mean, do you see yourself as a serialized is each work autonomous, or do you see them as part of an ongoing serial development? A body of work is a vast definition, it's an all-encompassing.
Sure.
Whereas some artists approach process with a serialized concept in mind to working through an idea, and other artists just spontaneously generate from the singular viewpoint.
Sure. Yeah, I'm probably just trying to be as spontaneous as possible.
Mhm.
But there is, I guess, instead of saying body of work, maybe I should have said something like there's something consistent and coherent from one piece to the next piece to the next piece.
Okay, so there's a language that is being worked through.
For me, again, I can only speak for myself, a very hard fought, hard won specific language that I'm using with everything that I do. That's very rooted in a lot of art history that I've sort of cherry picked or things I've liked and trying to sort of push it forward into a slightly different direction.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I consider working as a lifelong experiment when every painting has to surprise you because you create something you never saw before.
Mhm.
And so then you see it and you look for a while, and then of course you pass on to the next one.
Mhm. You never see the same painting twice in the same way. That's one of the extraordinary
Right.
things about visual culture, visual art.
That's right.
You know, if I see this painting today and then in 6 months I see it somewhere else, painting hasn't changed, but I'm in a different context.
And for instance, I found a painting of Natasha taking a bit away, and great painting, and on the back I saw, okay, it was große Düsseldorfer Kunstausstellung. And I realized that was a painting from a complete different time, and she overpainted it completely.
Yeah.
And there is nothing, hardly anything left, maybe some bits and pieces, nobody would ever recognize it. And I must admit it, for me, old paintings are sometimes a bit in danger because
We want to erase them.
yeah, because no,
Well,
I don't destroy them. I start off, oh, I will do this differently, and then you know how it is. It's a painting is a system. You do a little bit here, and that means, oh shit, I have to do a little bit there, and then oh, then this doesn't work. And
That's Frank Stella's critique of European painting. I say, problem with European art is it's easel based. You have to do a little something in this corner, and then you have to compositionally balance it out in such and such a corner.
yeah, but I see the composition is for me the king's discipline.
Yeah.
And
European
I agree with Brecht. Form ohne Inhalt is nothing, and Inhalt ohne Form is nothing as well. So, and I think in the composition we have content, and you create content through composition.
Mhm.
And this is this context is subconscious. You don't know about this content when you do it. You just follow that sort of composition, and then suddenly something creates like an autopoetical process.
It evolves within the work. It's an evolution. So processes of evolution in it.
Right.
Okay. You want to say about your process, Claudia?
Yeah, it's interesting because painting is always a combination between intuitive thinking and intellectual.
Mhm.
My work more or less starts with thinking. So it's never just like starting on blank canvas. I always have something, usually events that touch me and they don't let me go. Or
So you have a
topics that
subject
don't-
matter to go with.
I wouldn't, that's too narrow.
Mhm.
It's really very broad. but it continues. These topics continue, like visit me again, and it's kind of like nurturing the development of this thing that becomes a painting. And then, but it's really like finding a golden line. And the closer you get to the golden line, the better the work becomes. Does it make sense?
The golden.
It's like a golden line you have, like an imagination, what you want. It's a mixture between thought and emotion, and I follow that line. And it's surprising how the form can change with it. That's why I think my work is also quite diverse. Sometimes it's narrative stories, it can be figurative more, it can be cartoon-like, and then it looks mostly abstract. Yeah, but then when you look closer, you can find it. And it's a long process with lots of sketching. And some sketches then and drawings, I find what kind of then can carry what I want. And I wanted to have that in the emotional but also in the intellectual. And that's of course difficult to reach, because then also you have to forget the topic to just see the painting. It's always a back and forth.
Well, it's interesting that all of the artists so far have expressed an approach to painting that is not particularly conceptual, on the one hand, and remembering that half of abstract art in the 20th century is conceptual, ending up, I suppose, with minimalism, mostly strategized through concept. And each of you have sort of said you rely on the intuitionism that's at work in process. Is that so, Juan?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, no question about it.
You're an intuitive painter, and you, Herman?
Howard Sherman, not Herman. Howard Sherman.
I keep every time I see the name Sherman, I think of the American Civil War. I'm afraid.
Hey man, it's about vibe, you know. It's about, yeah, I guess, which is synonymous with intuition. So, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that going on, for sure, all the time, you know. So.
Intuitionism is sometimes called the sixth sense. I suppose modern thoughts of intuitionism go back to Immanuel Kant. Because you can't prove the existence of God, you've got to locate him in some intuitive.
I mean, I would even say there's a lot of. I mean, you're being very clinical in your discourse about this. I would think that a lot of art, whether it's conceptual art or more process-based art in the context of the conversation. I mean, it's all the best of all of it does have some intuition involved in it. It's that X factor. Some people would call that magic, you know, and
some people call it the spiritual in art. You know.
Yeah, sure, for sure. Yeah, I think that I mean these are all terms getting to the same sort of place, which is probably what people crave out of their art, which is something that transcends pure logic and takes us somewhere that we can't quite quantify or articulate, you know. I mean, I certainly feel that way looking at a Carl Andre plate on the floor, just like I would looking at I don't know, de Kooning, or I'm trying to think of artists that we're all going to know, regardless of where in the world we're tuning in from, you know.
Carl Andre, like the minimalist, plays with objects, you know, and objects usually are not equivalent to abstract painting. Remember, minimalism was called systemic objects, was its first name. Only got the word minimalism in 1966, invented by Richard Wollheim, an English academic who went to Berkeley and invented the word. So always within minimalism, there is a sense of the object and the thing. You don't have an object, as it were, other than the painting in itself in the process of abstract painting. Painting, before it's anything else, is a painting, regardless of what's on the surface.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I keep thinking as you talk, like I show out in Marfa, Texas a lot. I get out to Marfa, Texas a couple times a year, and I I mean, I'll walk into a space with Donald Judd, with a Donald Judd installation of his objects or his boxes or what have you installed on the wall. And if the light's just right in the space, there's something that feels kind of magical going on there that doesn't feel that terribly different than I'm looking at a expressionistic painting on the wall somewhere, you know? So, I mean, I'm not trying to steer us away from the context or the subject matter of the show that we're here to talk about. I was just sort of thinking about the words and terms we're using to describe it.
Well, one of the aspects of the show we're in at the moment is that it's quite a heterogeneous practice, and I would call it postmodern abstraction if I had to put a label on it. I'm not using that label, but in a certain sense, it's heterogeneous in that you've layered the contents. You're singing different songs. You know, you all have a knowledge of art history. You all have the source of things, and you incorporate these into a sort of layered interface, which is very different to how high modernism functioned, say, in the 50s in America in abstract expressionism and so on. So in a sense, abstraction today is much more self-knowing as a practice, is that not? Than perhaps at any other time. It returned again in the 80s, obviously, in strategies of so-called bad painting in New York and in Europe. But you all have a great knowingness about the history of abstraction. Maybe the other should say something about this.
I have a question to these American artists. And generally, for abstract artists, I have this dilemma. I'm living in a time of wars, of raising fascism, of genocides, and of course you can't say I'm painting my abstract paintings and everything else doesn't touch me.
Yeah.
But how can you react, for instance? You're living in America in this highly tense political situation. How do you react as a painter, as an abstract painter, in a situation like that? I did always tend to change my style in these days, and I get more figurative because I mean, you can't paint Guernica as an abstract painting. Or
the fact that you bring up Guernica is very important because one of the death knells of abstraction in the 30s was the Spanish Civil War. And how does abstract art address violence and transgression, which was so extreme at that time, terror, and the only medium that was able to achieve that was photography. Because with photography, you can show and documentation. So it's very difficult for abstract art, as it were, to deal with horror and terror and these sort of things. But looking here at Juan seems to suggest that his work does have this sort of commitment, obviously in the context of America and the racial history of America. I mean, after all, you live in one of the southern states, so how do you see your abstract art engaging with this political history?
Now,
Right?
I think in very subtle ways. It's not always apparent, nor is it intended to be apparent. In much the same way that things that occur and have occurred historically have become more insidious because they are quiet, because they are not as outward as they once were. I think we express ourselves in much the same way. We talk about things in subtleties. Those who know. Those who don't, either they don't know because they don't want to know. But you can place things clearly in front of them in a very, very exacting way, and they still can't recognize it. So it's not always about painting something or doing something along those lines that the masses will recognize. It's more important about you arriving at a place as an artist where you can put this on paper, on canvas, in sculpture, whatever it is you're doing, or in music or in literature, because it's what you feel. So you arrive at a place where you're not speaking for anyone else beyond yourself. I'm not speaking for everyone that looks like me. I'm not speaking to everyone that looks like me. I'm not speaking to the rest of the world, per se.
But you're
I'm
speaking
speaking
about
my
the
truth
history.
as relates to my experiences. All right, these are my experiences. This is what I've experienced. This is what I know. I can speak about that in a very authentic way. And that's more important to me than speaking for you or someone else, if you will.
Okay, so maybe we should talk to maybe Claudia or Fiona and Richard. In what way do you think your work engages the world? I mean, what we're really talking about is text and context. The text is the artwork, the context is the world in which it was generated. And this is always a polemic for every artist, the boundary between text and context. So Fiona, what do you?
I'm very unsure about how abstract art in itself addresses or acts politically, because I find when it does, it's often hanging on a charged title or something. And you know, that's not really how it works. I thought it was interesting what Juan said about the power of pushed aside people and artists being part of that as the political energy of art. And as a Canadian, now we're on this very nationalistic position of trying to find our own identity and somehow separate ourselves from being swallowed up supposedly by the United States. And you know, we're being, you know, supporting each other and supporting our local economy and staying at home and not traveling until our point is being recognized. But at the same time, my community is artists. And these American artists that are on the screen are my people, they're abstract painters. You know, so does my political act be to close down this communication because we're on different sides of a border? Or do we intensify our contact and talk about painting in Germany?
Yeah.
You know?
But having said that, I mean, it isn't only the specificity of national identity that you're alluding to. I mean, there is the human responsibility in the world.
Yeah.
As people,
You know what?
Sorry,
I have something I want to mention really quickly. You know, one thing we're kind of we're sort of missing out on, which has been crucial to my relationship with Galerie Kremers, is 21st century technology. You know, so we're using this 20th century sort of context with borders and nationalities to sort of talk about how we're missing the fact that everyone's being informed through their phone, you know, and seeing everything everywhere now. And which you touched on regarding the work before, you know. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but
no, what you're saying is the revolution that we've moved from a world of diachrony, linear history, into a world of synchrony, where you can have Mickey Mouse on your screen in 1 minute and a minute later you can have something totally different. So in a certain sense, this is what I was trying to talk about, the palimpsest. The idea of the palimpsest is exactly that. That is this layered complexity that we find in contemporary practice.
well, I mean, I guess we're all making artwork informed by everything around us, regardless of the political climate, you know.
Well, there we are. Claudia said, but we are political beings. Maybe you should say what you want to say.
Yeah, because we all live in this time, but I'm not for like superficial activism. And now I don't have the urge to now take everyday news or all the horrors, which suddenly are in the news. I mean, these horrors, they exist for the last 30 years, I guess, but they were just not in the media as much. But countries have been erased, like nearly erased, and thousands of drones kind of shot to half the world. And of course, I live in this time, and then I make topics out of it. And I'm also a political being, and I think it's also not how only what work you make, but also how you act and how you are as a human being. That just pushes a lot of little ripples, and where these ripples go, what people see in my work, that's out of my hands. You know, but you can be kind of responsible how you probably debate things, and you know, it's multifaceted. You know, it's not just a word as an artist.
Yeah, I mean, we as human beings are considered as individuals on one side and as socio-political, as a social being. And these are the two sides. This is the positive and the negative form, like yin and yang, which we are. And if the so-called negative, could be the positive form, is so violent and so fascistary, then of course it does something to the other side. And this is what I'm interested in.
Okay.
Well, I mean, then maybe at that particular moment in time that your paintings might become more violent, even if it's not literally depicting violence, and that's a feeling that the viewer is going to get from looking at your work. I keep thinking as this conversation goes on about this quote that I've read repeatedly recently, which it says, I'm paraphrasing, but it's like, art is inherently a political act. And many people would agree with that, even if the artist isn't necessarily trying to be political. I mean, maybe I use the color purple, or not the color purple. That's quoting a movie title. Maybe I'm using the color, yellow in a
Maybe you were
painting, and
being
so
Prince at the time.
maybe I was what? Wait, what?
Maybe you were being Prince. Prince.
Right. Well, no, let's say I'm using yellow. I'm just going to
Back to
randomly say
music.
yellow, and someone's going to come across the painting that's got yellow in it and find something political to resonate within that painting, which kind of leads back to what Juan Logan was alluding to at the beginning of this point you were trying to make.
Okay. One of the reason I bring up this thing is the claim of your abstract art historically from its inception in the 1880s and 90s was that it was a universal art. So in a certain sense, it's supposed to transcend national identities and national movements, because remember, on the spiritual in art, eternality was very central to the principle of not only of Kandinsky and Malevich and suprematism at the beginning of abstraction, but this universality was always transcended the notion of specific identities. Of course, text and context then take a different shape if you're trying to create an art that aspires to be universal as a form of expression. What do you think about that? Do you see it as an aim for universal art form?
Yes.
Yeah. You agree?
Yeah. I mean, I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
You disagree.
And the thing about it too is that I'm not.
The thing about art is that it's free, really free, and every human is so different. So of course the results are very different, or it will always be, And the more is possible in the world, also doing the multi-perspective with all of these digital stuff and being at so many places at the same time. I mean, of course, there are these unique developments, and you can go in each little development, you can go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and then it becomes unique and really, really great, strong art.
Okay, that's
Well, that doesn't necessarily make it regional. What she just described doesn't necessarily make it. It might be regional, but it can relate to a larger audience than just people in that region.
Yeah.
Okay.
But at the same time, though, I don't think we are ever trying to provide access to our work for everyone.
Sorry?
I said I don't think we are ever trying to provide access to our work for everybody in the world. That's not what we're doing. We're trying to answer our own questions. And I've always said that if you want to deepen your investigation, ask better questions. So depending on the depth of your questions that you're asking, your images will respond to those questions. And again, I can't imagine any writer writing for the world. He's writing, or she's writing primarily for themselves.
Yes.
It's his or her book, his or her research, whatever it is they're doing. Now, if you want to explore that, then you can, but that requires that you also ask questions yourself, and maybe of yourself.
That's true. Every artist is producing for themselves, so they're asking questions of themselves, which they then express. But one of the central features of the history of abstraction was its desire to seek to be a universal art form. part of the polemic today is we're talking about abstraction in Germany as opposed to abstraction in America. I showed at the beginning that Hans Ackerman, of course, was German and very influential on abstract expressionism. So, but this universal aspiration is central to abstract art, and has always been there from the outset. So what I'm trying to say is it's not about the nation state, it's about the human state. It's about conditions in human expression within abstract practice are universal. You want to say something about that?
I think when I think about abstract art, about the idea of it being a universal art is much too broad, because that would imply that all abstraction goes the other way and speaks to me. I would say that there are certain pieces in abstraction that are asking questions that I have also wondered about, and those pieces speak to me for those reasons. And it's not local. It could universally, I could find my 10% of people who are wondering about those questions abstractly, and those pieces will draw me, and we will find each other anywhere through this mutual curiosity. But I think there are a number of different questions and ideas happening at the same time in abstraction, and in it itself is not a uniform language that we're all speaking.
Okay, well, it's clearly not a uniform language, because we have this dichotomy between the more conceptual extremes of, on the one hand, and then the more expressive condition. Paintings here are very, very within the tradition, I think, of the informel, within the informal, a lot of gesture, a lot of mark making. They're not made with a ruler for the most part, though I know sometimes you occasionally use masking tape. But so maybe we should open it to the audience. Does the audience have something to say about abstract art? How do they respond to this art that to me seems a very heterogeneous practice of layering not only references to art history, but a sort of self-reflexive knowledge that is present in being a painter practitioner in the world today, much more so than, say, and this is to do with, as Howard says, to do with the way art is mediated today, new technologies. So does anyone have?
It's not only that. Artists always were thieves of other artists, of course. In former times, like Picasso in Greece, and they had this.
Well, that idea was coined by Heinrich Wülflin, the founder of art history. He said artists learn more from other artists than they do from nature. So artists have always been magpies and thieves, and that's why they're not philosophers. That's why they're artists, because they take from different places.
And the difference today is that the Americans, the Canadians, the Chinese, they all have internet.
Yeah.
And they all look into the internet, and so they don't have to have their studio in the same bloody road. So they look into the studio of this one, and then you get sort of a universal abstract.
That's why I brought up the question of the universal with the media of the modern age. And we should ask ourselves, could this universal vision that began at the beginning of abstract painting or abstract art in general, could it be fully realized within this new mediated environment? Maybe each of you should speculate and have a projection on that. What about, let's start with Juan and we'll go through the whole panel.
I think there will always be those who will use the current technology to make work, and they will influence what they're doing, how they're doing it. But then there are also painters, like the ones in this room, who will always not use that same technology in the same way, because that was never the foundation for our work in the first place. And I think we will use our foundations to build on, not necessarily to leave for this new technology.
Okay. What about you, Howard?
Well, I'm trying to figure out what exactly is the question.
Question is, given we're talking about a world that is now fully mediated, and that you sitting in Houston are talking to me sitting in Berlin, talking to Juan who's in North Carolina, and so on and so forth. We've created a synchrony, a world where potentially abstraction's aspiration to the universal could be theoretically at least fulfilled. Do you feel that's the question? Do you think abstract art today has a role to play in fulfilling its initial aim to be a universal form of expression?
I guess I do. But I kind of think of what was talked about a little earlier, where we're in this sort of post 20th century abstraction era where we're all kind of using all these different things that came before us to talk about something different. So I don't know if it's possible to achieve that sort of purity that you're alluding to, which was a notion from whatever 100 years ago or something.
It's been
I
claimed before. It has been claimed before. The most famous claim is by André Malraux, who was the Minister of Culture in Paris, and in 1958 said, "Abstract is the universal art of our time." Didn't last long.
yeah, I
It
mean,
has been pop art and lots of other things.
uh I mean, I guess I don't know if it's the universal art of our time is, I don't know, that's a pretty broad.
That's merely a quote by André Malraux. It doesn't make it true.
Yeah, no, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not, I don't really think of my work or even the theme of this show as something that topples something that came before it. I don't know if that's possible anymore. I see nothing really ever dies anymore. Everything's still there. This isn't 1998, we're in a different time now. So, um, I don't really know if I have a good answer to that question or not. I do like the idea of making something that resonates with people from a completely different. This sort of jumps back to where we were a minute ago in the conversation, but I think I love the idea of making something that someone from somewhere else who has a completely different culture, history, background than me can something they can resonate with it in some way, or they can relate to it in some way, and in some ways come up with their own personal narrative or story about it that was not in my mind when I was making it to begin with.
So that brings up an issue that we haven't discussed, the question of reception. Of course, the viewer is not the maker, and the relationship of the viewer to the work is a very different. I mean, the viewer is free to interpret whatever they see in whatever way they wish, also framed within the context of their own life and their own understanding, of course. So in a sense, the idea of the universal in abstract art is intended to fulfill the role of the viewer in itself. Whereas you seem to suggest that some people will get it and some people won't.
You're going to get on and off the train at whatever stop, no matter what. I don't think that would change if we were all recreating photography with painting or doing some sort of hyper representational thing. Uh, and you know, people are going to get on. People are going to see what they're going to see. And well, that depends on whether they're cranky and or happy, or they skipped lunch, or you know what I mean. It's I mean, we're kind of, these things are a bit semantic here, but I kind of come back to what Juan had said before, which is like, you do, I'm kind of, I don't want to sound like a hypocrite, but I do agree with that. You have to essentially make for yourself first and foremost. And, try and please yourself. I don't know if please is the right word or not, but try and please yourself with what you're doing. Um, before anyone else, and then hopefully other people can relate to it, and they can resonate with it in one way or another.
We're looking at the internet, and let's call it Instagram largely when we're visual artists.
Yes, of
We
course.
have this idea that maybe we're entering some kind of universal abstraction because people from all over the world but this is a complete false universal. It's not how it exists. Everybody's experience of this social media almost nightmare now
Yeah.
is completely unique. And it gives the illusion of living in a world where everybody looks like you and thinks like you. And the painting that I see is the painting that I attract. And
Absolutely.
it's not a universal language that's happening out there,
No.
you know?
Good point. Very much. I agree with that. What about you, Claudia?
Yeah, I think a good artwork touches, but you just never know when people see it. You know, sometimes it takes for a strong artwork it takes sometimes 30 years to be perceived in the way how it was made, and it's also that things that people's art is busy is often something nobody necessarily thinks about at the time. So so there's this time gap, and so this is why I think, especially when it's abstract painting, it's of course a language you have to see, you have to experience the work. That's back to the internet thing. You can't have it digitally; it just doesn't do it. And then it also might take time.
Like Hiltner went.
Yeah, and then yeah, exactly. And even the artist sometimes misses out on it, seeing and destroys the work. And bad luck, you know, you just get better at that with time.
Well, you're talking about reception. Reception, of course, is. I'm going to put my art historical hat on again. I used to say to my students, there are 5 things you need to think about when you're looking at a work of art. You have to think about the maker. That's the human being who makes it. Very complicated human beings are. There are no two alike. We're all different. So there's one universe to address, one categorization. Then you have a material means. All materials you use have material limits. You can't put a Richard Serra on a glass table. You know, there are material limits that constrain an artist. There are only certain things you can do with certain materials. Then you have the thing that's made, not yet the work of art. Let's just call it the thing that is made. All these are things that have been made in the world. And then you have what's called the reception. That's when it enters the discourse of art. I mean, I could tell you I'm the greatest painter that ever lived, but I just do it alone in my attic and I don't show anybody. You know, so there is a sense in reception is the embodiment of presenting art to the world. And then, of course, there's the so-called the historiography, because I said earlier, I can never see this painting here for a second time as a first time. You know, one moves on.
In the river.
Sorry? It's the river, it's Bergson, it's Heraclitus, it's whatever it is. So, you know, reception, how do you want your work to be responded to? Seems to me a very central thing that an artist, they may make it for themselves, but what do they want the people to feel when they see it? And that's particularly relevant with abstract art that sought this universal communication. Tell me.
I have to say that I don't, maybe this is terrible, I don't really paint for other people. I paint for myself and for the experience of discovering something new. And it's interesting how other people see my work when I hear about it, but I don't have a viewer in mind.
You don't have
No.
a sense of how it will be received. What about you, Gregor? You have a sense of how people will respond to your work, or how you would like them to respond to your work?
There are several stages in your life, and there are stages of career, and then things change. I mean, I'm old now. I'm 76, and when you get older, then you have a certain limited perspective on your life, and of course, you can't think in career ideas don't make sense at all. Of course, in former times, I worked for gallery shows or things like that, or to be shown here and there. Now, I just work for pleasure. I mean, I don't have to work anymore because I painted thousands of paintings. So if it's not my pleasure, well, why should I paint another painting?
Okay.
And
You don't feel it has to be in the world, but
no, nothing has to be in there. Or I hear something, an interesting symphony or whatever, which I never heard, then I write it down in the painting. And then, of course, while painting, then half of this disappears. And then in the end, that's think of who was this bloody composer of that piece of music, because 2/3 of it are gone already. So
Well,
maybe the title is the rest of that
Yeah.
until I find out.
But all paintings are durational in the sense that it takes time to produce them, unlike a photograph, click an image, and when you incise from the world.
And you invent everything.
Yeah,
That's the exciting thing about painting.
the painting,
Palimpsest, by the way.
sorry?
The palimpsest are this, is the half the title and all
Yes,
that. And these are
exactly.
these layers.
I just wanted to talk about titles because I began this talk saying that the first monochrome painting was in 1882, an anarchic gesture in the Salon des Incohérents, the Incoherence Salon, if you like, Salon of Incoherence in Paris, and it disappeared, and yet it was rediscovered in 2017, 130 years later, in a private collection in Paris, and its title was Combat des Nègres pendant la nuit, Battle of Negroes during the night. We don't use the word Negroes anymore, but it's very interesting, you see, how can you connect that title to a black monochrome painting, which predates Malevich by 30 years almost. You know,
I think he
and
was figurative.
sorry,
I think he was figurative.
who was figurative?
The monochrome one.
No, well, it was a black. Yes, maybe the figurative in the title, yes.
Titles are really significant. I have a background in a what feels like a previous life. I was a daily comic strip cartoonist, and so a big part of that was writing and writing jokes. And so I keep a running list of titles, and sometimes they have everything to do with the work, and sometimes they have absolutely nothing to do with the work. And sometimes they're very philosophical, and sometimes they're very sophomoric, and yeah, so I like playing with words.
So you like whimsy, what we call whimsy.
Sure, I'm cool with whimsy for sure. Yeah.
Well, I think your titles are brilliant, Howard. I love your paintings, but also the titles. And
Give us
Thanks,
some-
Christine. Thanks, Christine. Check's in the mail.
I mean, what has confused the history of abstract art in many ways is the division of Europe after the Second World War. I mean, Berlin was considered part of Eastern Europe in that period, but Berlin is not Eastern Europe. Berlin is the middle of Europe. And what we're living through in the last 30 years is the re-emergence of Central Europe. The great cities of Central Europe were Prague, Budapest, Vienna, Berlin, and the East in Europe was Moscow. So that division, I think, is distorted. And the language got involved in abstract art with the division of hot and cold art in the post-war period. You know, those are terms we associate with political history, the Cold War, the Hot War, and so on and so forth.
It's hard to tell because we're not really into the history of art up until the last dozen years.
Yeah.
So do I feel more free now than I was in the 50s?
But you think are the
Yeah.
qualities, yes. Do you think
I
are
have
there,
access to a career, that's
Yeah.
pretty good.
that's really good, yeah. But you think there are qualities that are indicative of women using abstraction that is distinct from men? I say this because, you know, Lee Krasner was buried under Pollock, the wife of Jackson
And
Pollock.
all the other women are very underneath Krasner.
Yeah, well, yeah. So,
No, I'm Apollo.
but you think there are qualities, I mean, Helen Frankenthaler and a lot of women artists, women were very evident in the Eastern Europe, you know, in constructivism and in the 20s and 30s. very, very evident. Women were very involved, just as involved as the men were in communist state, in communist Russia. But are there qualities that you would say, I, as a woman abstract artist, have that distinguishes me
No.
from? So you see yourself just as an artist who happens to be a woman.
I
What
was
about
just
you?
born into this heat blanket, and it
Sorry?
happens to be a woman.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't think that there are distinct differences between a male artist and a female. I don't think so. I
it's
think
interesting
we-
you say that.
Because characters are so different. You know, you have got so many girls who are like guys and many guys who are like women, you know, and then everything in between. Most of us are like bisexual anyway.
It sounds like unisex from the 60s.
I think it's more culture. The culture tells you, okay, woman is more weak, so women find softer and all of that stuff. But I don't believe in that. I think now I personally I like to make work. I try and move myself, even if it's in part. I want to be able to drag it by myself.
I wanted to bring this up, I'll tell you why, because as women finally got free from the yoke of male dominance in the, let's say the 1980s really is the beginning. It started with feminism, obviously, in the 60s and 70s, but as women broke away, they wanted to generate initially a woman's art. You know, you have in America, you even have women's art museums. So the notion of they wanted to place their status as a woman ahead of their status as an artist. But it seems to me the new generation of women do not want to be seen as women first, artists second. They want to be artists who happen to be women.
But one can't mix the gender and the form. You know, you separated the form that women do different, like, is there a difference how women make work or the outcomes? We're talking about the outcomes, not about the.
Yeah, well, there are, I'm talking about sensibilities. Is there such a thing as a female sensibility that is distinct from male sensibility? You don't, what you're saying now seems very much at one with the view we hold now, but that wouldn't have been a view 20 or 30 years ago.
You know, I have a son who's 17,
Yeah,
and this binary business is over.
it's okay. So that's
They
a good
don't-
idea.
They don't subscribe to it.
Okay, okay, so you see yourself as an artist, you just happen to be female.
Pretty
Okay.
much. Yeah.
What do the audience think? Do the audience think there is a particular female sensibility about not only abstract art in general, sir?
No.
No? Is that a man saying that?